A little backstory. I've lived in Central Florida my entire life. When I was 20, I met Jackie in an online video game and fell in love. She lived in Indiana, so after 4 years of long distance, I moved to Indiana to live with her. That was 2 years ago. It was May when I moved. Jackie flew down so we could make the 18-hour drive up to Indiana together. We loaded up my belongings, along with my dog and my cat, into my tiny hatchback and set off to my new home. It took a couple months for me to find a job. I entered the workforce straight out of high school and never went to college. So, my experience was all in pet stores and zoos. Growing up in Central Florida meant there were always theme parks and zoos for the tourists. I had professionally worked with animals since I was 15, and we had always had a plethora of pets when I was a kid. Caring for animals was the one thing I knew how to do. In northern Indiana, the animal husbandry jobs were scarce. It was an industrial area. Jackie and I lived in a tiny town a few hours north of Indianapolis, and the only things around there were cornfields and factories. There were rundown churches and gas stations and a McDonald's, speckled on street intersections. But for the most part, the area was fields and huge factories and warehouses. There were no zoos or pet stores anywhere within a reasonable daily driving distance. So, I spent the first few months after getting settled into my new home working in a factory. It was an assembly job. I sat in a chair for 10 hours a day and assembled thousands of air pumps. You know the kind they attach to bubblers and fish tanks? Those kind. It was tedious and mind-numbing. I'd spent my entire life working with animals, and I couldn't handle staring at my hands for 10 hours a day. So, I registered and interviewed at a temp agency, and strictly told them, no factories. They basically told me not to get my hopes up. 99.99% of the jobs they got were factory work, and that very rarely they'd get some kind of clerical office position. I bargained on that fact and told them to call me when something came up, and went home to sulk. I was expecting at least a month to go by before I heard anything from them, with as rare as non-factory work was in the area. I was pleasantly surprised when I got a call from the temp agency the next day. When I answered the phone, a male voice greeted me. I was initially hesitant. There were only women on the staff at the agency while I was there. The man said his name was Jim, and he was calling from Best Temp Agency. I changed the name for anonymity, obviously. But I guess I had no reason to doubt his authenticity. Maybe he had just had the day off while I was there. Anyway, he told me he'd found me a job. It was at a factory, but in their human resources department as a receptionist. I was ecstatic. A receptionist job wasn't anywhere close to the work I was familiar with, but who can't file paperwork and answer phone calls, right? I told Jim I'd take the job, and he gave me the address and told me to go there Monday at 8 a.m. I told Jackie all about it, and she was excited for me. Monday rolls around, and I put on my fanciest outfit, plug the address Jim gave me into my phone, and drive my way there. The address led me to an industrial park, with about a dozen different companies' buildings littered about. All in all, there were probably 15-ish huge warehouses and factories. The place I was looking for was on the outer edge of the park in the back. It looked like every other building there. Huge, white building, probably 30-foot ceilings, no windows, giant fans for what I assumed would be cooling, and giant garage-type doors for receiving. Nothing about the building seemed out of the ordinary. I parked and started to the door marked Headquarters. A woman was sitting behind the front desk, and I introduced myself as the new receptionist. Turns out this lady, we'll call her Mandy, was the current receptionist, and she was going to be my trainer for the job, as she was moving out of state. She took me quickly around the office and introduced me to roughly 50 people, and had me poke my head out into the factory so I could see it. It all looked similar to the assembly place I'd worked for earlier in the year. For 2 weeks, Mandy taught me how to be a receptionist, and I took to it easily. I was on my own by the 3rd week, and everything was going great. So, for an entire year, I worked there. I'd go home every day, tell Jackie how my day was. The joke Kim from accounting had told me, Karen in customer service's story about the cute thing her daughter did last night, and what color beanie Daniel the IT guy was wearing that day. The day after my 1-year anniversary at the company, they got me a cake. I drove to work like I'd done every Tuesday for a year. I was sipping a Starbucks mocha as I made my way through the industrial park to my building. When I rounded the final corner, I slammed on my brakes and stared out my windshield. It was gone. My building was gone. Gone isn't even the right word. Gone implies that there was once a building there. But the plot of land that I was 100% sure held my building was a normal forest of pine trees. There was a weathered plot for sale sign out front, and an 800 number to call if interested. I put my car in park and got out, and walked hesitantly towards the sign. I peered around it but saw nothing but trees, tall ones too. There were decades-old pine trees. They'd definitely been there longer than I'd been alive. I sprinted to the closest factory. The warehouse guys kept the garage door open on warm days, and they were lounging in the grass on a smoke break. They looked up at me warily. One guy stood up. I looked at him, panting, and pointed to the forest. "What?" The guy interrupted me.
"Look, we don't want no trouble from you. We seen you out there in the trees every day for a year. We don't want to have to report you for trespassing."
I blinked. "Trespassing?" He nodded.
"Yeah. We were about to call that 800 number on the sign when we see you out there the first time, but you was just sitting in the grass. We assumed you were homeless. So we let you be. So long as you don't cause no trouble."
The other men nodded in agreement. I staggered. "I don't understand." The man just shrugged at me.
"I think it's about time you found a new place to hang out. We spent enough time out there in those trees."
I took off towards my car, got in, and sped home. I'm sitting in front of my home computer, staring at my bank account. There was an obvious $300 from the company being deposited into my bank account every week. Where had the money come from if I was crazy and had imagined an office for an entire year? Was I seriously just driving to a forest and wandering around in the trees for 8 hours a day? I have an entire year's worth of memories from that office. There were over 100 people there. I know more than half of them by name. Have I really gone insane?